This is Prompting Potential, where we step into the world of entrepreneurs, innovators inside and outside of organizations who ignite inspiration, fuel innovation, and unleash imagination against all odds. Prompting Potential spotlights incredible individuals and influential ideas at the intersection of leadership, technology, and transformation. I'm Roger Rohatke, the Chief AI Officer at Chai, and you can find us at heychai.ai. Hey everybody, I'm Roger Rohatke, and welcome to Prompting Potential. This is the show where we tap into the minds of entrepreneurs, tech mavens, AI mavericks, daring leaders, digital gurus, and design thinkers. The fearless innovators inside and outside organizations who are pushing boundaries, driving transformation, and turning bold ideas into real-world breakthroughs. I'm especially excited about today's guest, Abigail Posner. She's a true force of insight and imagination, equal parts strategist, storyteller, and provocateur. Abigail has this rare, almost enigmatic ability to connect dots most of us don't even see, pushing the edge of creativity and technology in ways that genuinely move people. And her knack for bridging the human and the high tech, it's next level. So today's conversation is going to explore how expansive thinking and AI intersects to unlock human creativity and drive meaningful innovation. It's bold, it's thought-provoking, and it's exactly the kind of conversation we live for on this show. So get ready, because this episode is packed with insights that'll challenge your thinking, spark your creativity, and prompt the full power of your potential. So let's dive in. So Abigail, first off, welcome. You are a Harvard-educated cultural anthropologist, visionary creative strategist, and you've been at Google for almost 14 years, and most recently you were the director of US Creative Works. This is so impressive. Now you're doing so many things, right? Like Anthropology is one, but then you're doing fashion shows and speaking engagements and podcasts. It's amazing, really. So I want to hear about all of these pursuits, really, and how they came together for you, what drives you both in and outside the tech world, and I want to hear your story, right? We want to get into that, and we want people to really understand who is Abigail Posner, right? But first, you recently interviewed Maye Musk, right? Which, by the way, is incredible. And she's such an awesome icon in her own right. So I want to know, what stood out to you in that conversation, and what did you really take away from your time with Elon's mom?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Roger, for having me. I'm really honored to be on this amazing podcast with you, who is also an entrepreneur, creative thinker, pushing the boundaries. So it's so much fun to be with you. Well, with Maye, I have to say I was really pleasantly surprised. I mean, first of all, she is gorgeous. Like, you sit down next to her and you feel that energy, that power, that magnetism, right? But she's also so lovely, right? You have this image of someone who, is on the runways and is all over the world and just wrote a book, and you think, okay, she must be some kind of diva. She was so lovely and so brilliant, and she took us through her journey. And there's so much to say about her, but the one thing that really stood out for me is that she really didn't become an icon until later in her life, right? She's been a model throughout her life. She has 2 PhDs. She's a nutritionist. She's a scientist. So it's, she modeled on the side. But what people remember about her is her now as a model with that striking white hair. And so as someone who is going through transitions in my life, to be able to see her really, really catapult herself in her 70s as a fashion icon was just so inspiring.
Yeah, no, and it's really powerful. I mean, to have been able to bring that to life, in front of your audience too, and it's so cool. And to meet her, I bet was amazing. So look, take us back a bit, right?
Yeah.
I want to know more about your journey. Maybe how did you find your way to Google? Eventually, to all of these incredible intersections of tech, creativity, and culture, and just your story.
Absolutely. I would say there's kind of 2 or 3 elements of my story, which of course I didn't realize until later on in my life that, they were the ones that impacted me. But the first element of my story is probably my birth order, right? So I grew up as the 3rd child, and in a very loving household. My parents are academics, scientists. My brother and sister are very mathematically and science oriented, and I am not. I barely passed math. And so I think I realized very early on that for me to stand out for me to have an edge, I had to source from different talents that I had. Maybe talents that weren't necessarily important to my parents, but that I could use somehow. Like I had a good fashion sense and I was pretty good on a stage and kind of, had good EQ. And I was like, okay, I'm always going to take that with me. And I remembered then going through life and always really tapping these other sides to ensure that I had something additional to bring to the story. So when I was in college, for example, I thought, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to survive my college career. So here I was at the same university as my super smart siblings, right? Well, they belong there. I didn't think I belonged there. I had total imposter syndrome. And I'm like, okay, well, how am I not going to fail out of college? Well, I have this whole other side of me. I had gone to Jewish day school, yeshiva, my whole life. So I studied Jewish philosophy. I studied, Jewish history, Talmudic studies, Hebrew, you name it. So whenever I could, I would dip into my bag of goodies and reference this stuff to give me that edge. And in fact, when I ended up focusing on anthropology, as you mentioned, and so I did my thesis in Israel, for example. And then going into Google, you mentioned that, now I'm at Google. Again, I was like, okay, there's no way I'm going to survive in this place. Like I barely knew enough about technology, or it was a sales world. I'm like, how am I going to survive? Maybe 5 days at best, right? But I'm like, okay, what can I dip into? What other bag of goodies do I have that I can reference to give me that edge? And what I realized is, well, I may not know a lot about technology. I knew a heck of a lot about anthropology. And what I was seeing around me was that there was a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of what I call what people were doing with the digital space, how many times they were on their phone, how many clicks it took to get to a sale, what was the most watched video on YouTube. But nobody was asking why. Why are we watching these crazy videos? Why are we on our phones so much, really, right? Why does it take so many clicks to get to a sale? And I realized if we could understand not just what people were doing, but why they were doing it, we could so much more easily get to the how. We could help our clients and our engineers really leverage these spaces for content development, for ways to connect with their consumers. So here again, I'm referencing these other sides of me. And what I realized was what I was doing was actually employing what's at the heart of creative thinking. Creative thinking at its core, right? When you peel back the onion of what it means to be creative, it's not, oh, I went to art school or I know how to play a guitar. It's about combining unlike notions and concepts to reveal something novel and powerful, right? Star Wars, right? Something that I think you would find interesting, right? If you look at Star Wars, what is it? It's the combining of two unlike worlds, two unlike genres. Sci-fi meets Greek tragedy. Spray sunscreen. Creamy suntan meets Pam cooking spray. So I'm like, here, that's what I was doing. I was taking these different sides of me, seemingly unrelated, and connecting them to come up with a novel idea, a novel way of approaching the world. And I started realizing that what was my crutch was actually my superpower. This idea of combining unlike sides. And so when you asked me, like, why do I do all these things? Why do I go to these fashion shows? Why do I write articles? Why do I do a podcast? Why do I speak? Well, part of it is I have a lot of energy and I have a lot of different sides of me, but I also want to cultivate those sides because I truly believe that if you can combine these different sides, you will come up with novel ideas. If you employ the creative technique of combining unlike notions about yourself. And Roger, you do this. You combine so many different sides of yourself. You're an actor. You're a businessman. You're a creative thinker. You're an AI expert, right? You've been able to combine all these different sides to come up with unique ways of looking at the world and unique solutions for your clients and for your brands. And so I call that the expansiveness edge. So that my background, going back to what's my journey, certainly that crutch turning into that superpower was something that came from my life. And then, of course, my love for anthropology has been a leitmotif throughout my career. I studied social anthropology with an emphasis on economic anthropology.
Wow.
So interested in the confluence of culture and business. When you think about anthropology, you think about, okay, let's analyze why people eat what they eat or wear what they wear or dance the way they dance. In this case, it's why people trade what they trade, right? And all the values, inherent values that underpin our economic cultures. I remember my parents' friends going, anthropology, like, what are you going to do with that? Well, I have taken that with me every step of the way. So if anthropology is the study of why people do what we do, I went to advertising for 15 years, and that was the study of why people buy what they buy. Everything from Cheetos to insurance. And the answers to those whys are often profound and game-changing. And then, of course, I took it to Google. I referenced that, right? I tried to understand why people have the relationship they do with these technologies. And we literally hired PhD anthropologists, put them out in the field to uncover this. And we called it Humanizing Digital. And it became really a platform for me for a long time. But even beyond that, it's about asking a different set of questions that come from the anthropological lens versus maybe the classic business school lens or, technology lens. And so it's just been such a helpful resource for me to understand the world and unpack what's really going on around us.
Yeah. Well, so you know what I love about that? And I love about you is that you there's no one label that anybody can put on you. We're very similar in that, right? There's there's no box that fits us perfectly, right? And I never want that to be, all right? I never want, to be limited by one label or another. And you're definitely not. You have so many things that you do, and it's amazing. And it's actually also interesting that you hit on you're kind of touching on the Star Wars thing, of course. I love Star Wars.
Right.
The story behind Star Wars is, I think, what's so fascinating to me is that it's based upon the Joseph Campbell's writings of the hero's journey.
Absolutely.
And you are that hero that went in that journey. I mean, if you think about it, right? Like the way you told your story, it's like you had this, these things you had to overcome, and you stepped out into the world to figure it out, and then you overcame them, and then you realized you had these superpowers, and you were able to come back and defeat the dragon or whatever in your life.
True.
And then you did this stuff. I mean, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
And what I see fascinating about that is that you embody that very picture of what it looks like and what people can aspire to be as a hero in their journey, right?
I hope you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure in our culture to pick a lane, right? Who are you? We have to put you in a box so that we can identify where you should be and what you do. It's harder for people, for ourselves and for others, to deal with the multiplicity of who we are, right? It's just, you can't put them in the box that easily. That whole concept of personal brand, I'm always a little bit ugh, because the notion of that is that okay, you're in this confined box. And I couldn't be in that confined box. It's not always helpful to me, quite frankly. I mean, I'm thinking about this now as I transition to a kind of the next stage of my life. I think about who am I? There's a hodgepodge. That's even hard for me. I'm a branding expert, right? Yeah. So it's even hard for me. But I think at the end of the day, what's so glorious about where we're going to as we lead into the future with what technology has enabled for us, maybe we actually can embrace the multiplicity much more coherently and with much more happiness, because we don't have to force ourselves into these small boxes anymore.
And actually, it's interesting you said that about the multiplicity, because I've been really, going deep on this concept that I've been coining or talking about that called multipotentiality. I didn't come up with the term; it was already coined, but I kind of expanded it, right? Because multipotentiality or a multipotentialite kind of connotates that humans have multiple needs, multiple wants, but they have multiple skills, gifts, abilities, and talents.
Yes.
But they have limited time, limited resources, and sometimes they're labeled by a certain thing or a lane that they're in. But what if we were to go beyond ourselves, right? And, with AI now and things, we could really multiply our abilities and have a version of me doing, a podcast. And you have another version of me handling my finances, another version of me, taking care of, my bills or whatever, another one running a side hustle, another one in a video game with my kid or whatever, you know? And now I haven't been perhaps replaced, but I've been multiplied.
Absolutely. And Roger, you and I think, are so similar in that way. We get along so well because, even just in a conversation with you last night, all of a sudden I hear that you have a salsa brand, right? In addition to you being a superb podcaster, you've done acting, you've done voiceover, you have worked for some of the biggest, most powerful companies in the world. You've led thousands of people, right? You have so many sides of you. What a shame it would be if you can't express them, right? So I think it's both about enabling ourselves to express them in different ways, but also combine them.
Right.
Like when you can combine them, like, oh man, never thought of that before.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. One of the major beauties of AI is that generative AI isn't just that it spits out the answer for you. What's so great about generative AI is that it purposely allows you to make these connections among seemingly diverse concepts, worlds, to come up with something really amazing.
Yeah.
Right? So I would love the fact that we could do it for ourselves. I think we can do this for companies. I think we could do it for the gnarly problems that the world offers us. Just combine these different ideas.
And just to kind of round that out, I mean, I think, when I've, been engaging with AI at different levels or whatever, I'm realizing something that I knew, but I'm now getting more and more of a sense of it, that there's really more to you than you know. And there's more to me than I know. And sometimes it takes something like that to help unlock that. And I know that seems a little bit spooky for people, but it,
it is so true. It is so true.
Yeah. And so look, I mean, I think, there's a lot that you were there doing at Google, like you mentioned in some part of your history as well. And I'd love to ask a few questions on that as well. Like, because you mentioned Humanizing Digital.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that part, just a quick couple things like on the why, right? So you mentioned like there's a why behind why we eat Cheetos and now hot Cheetos or whatever. There's a why behind why we doom scroll or why we watch YouTube so many hours, whatever. Give me some of those whys. Like what were some of the things that you uncovered?
Well, I think what's also important about the whys is what they reveal about the ingenuity of human beings, right? I think one of my favorite activities is to dig into the why of the seemingly banal or stupid, right, behaviors that we do. But actually, if you uncover why we do what we do, you actually see the brilliance, right? So for example, with social media, with our phones, we sometimes would laugh at ourselves and others at the ridiculousness of the pictures we would take. Like, why do you need to take a picture of a cat going like this, right? Or why do you need to take another picture of a hamburger? It's a hamburger, right? It's not a Picasso hamburger. It's a hamburger. Like, what is the deal with that? That just seems like a total waste of time. Right. But what we revealed from all of that, especially when you see those pictures, because they're like slightly askew or slightly kind of off kilter or whatever, is that actually it's our way of embracing the familiar. What I call the fascination with the familiar. Yeah. Right? Why do you need to take a picture of a dirty pond, or puddle in New York City? Right. Because you see something, there's a rainbow that comes out and it's beautiful. And so before that, before we had our phones at our disposal, we would pass that stuff by. But now we actually look at the world with a new eye, with that sense of the fascination of the familiar, and we want to capture it. Yeah. How awesome is that? So that burger that's slightly askew or that weird yawn from the cat, it's not that it's bizarre. Yeah. It's that it reminds us of the beauty of the world, right? The beauty in the banal, right? And then you go, oh man, and I'll never forget this. This is many years ago when I was presenting one of the anthropological studies we did on video. We called it the meaning of memes. And there were all these different reasons why we watch these crazy videos on YouTube. And I'll never forget this much older gentleman comes up to me. So like, not your typical, kid watching YouTube, right? And he goes, thank you so much. Now I understand why I share what I share with my daughter. Right? Because he was sharing funny videos with his daughter back and forth. And he kind of thought it was like just a little, way to waste the time. But what I uncovered for him was how what that is really about energy exchange. Wow. About connecting people through that little laugh. Yeah. Right? That creates that social connection. And so I make you laugh, I know you're more connected to me. And then you send me something back and it makes me laugh, and I know you're more connected to me. Yeah. It's not a waste of time. It's a beautiful connecting process. And so for me to be able to give him that enlightenment and for him to feel like I now can, I know, I understand why I do it, and I'm going to want to do more of it, and I'm going to be able to connect even that much more deeply with my daughter because I'm going to do it more often. How awesome is that?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were saying that, it just reminds me of like, so my wife and I, we have, different ways that we express love to each other over the years, and like our love language has evolved and changed. And lately, I don't know, maybe over the last year or whatever, it's been, sending her an Instagram video and she's sending me one, and going back and forth and laughing about that, right? To the point now where we are both getting fed the same algorithm and we're both like, oh yeah, we already saw
Sending
it.
the same video.
So it's amazing that, that could be a way of connectivity and stuff. So I love that. And there's a why that's deep inside of us as humans that we want to connect, right? And
absolutely.
we want to have that, and I think it was this time in my life, I think it was 2018 or so, I started, getting into AI and things. And I was really trying to see like what makes us human. And I had this sense that this was coming, that people were going to ask this question, right? I kind of thought of it more as the world of robots and stuff that would be in the future, but I had this question in my head. And so I started doing a lot of research and it kind of before that time and then into that time, I got deeper into it. And the things I found was fascinating, and I kind of boiled it down to just 4 main things that make us human. Now there's many more, okay, but the first one is that we're cultural, right? And we are deeply connected to our society around us, our network, our friends, our family, but also our religious institutions or our spirituality,
favorite football teams,
games, sports, venues, or the arts, right?
Yes.
Theater, whatever. And so we're very, very cultural. That makes us human, like innately human.
Yes.
And the second is that we are tremendously curious, right? We have this awe and wonder of the world. We see rainbows and puddles in New York.
Right.
You know? We're so curious, right? And that curiosity is key, right? And then we're very creative, right? And we can bring things to life that was unimaginable, right? And that's very human. And then the last one is that we're compassionate, right? There's an empathy, there's a drive in us to bring to life that authenticity and that trust that people need through the empathy when we care about others, right? We genuinely care, and those things make us deeply human,
Absolutely.
And when you think about that human, I guess you've called it maybe a human code.
Yeah.
Like, how do you bring that into a company like Google? You mentioned earlier, and I had said we were going to come back to this about humanizing digital. How did you bring something that is so much more about the tech than it is about about being human? It's about being human, not just about the tech.
Yes.
How did you bring that and drive that as a kind of an entrepreneur inside of Google and bring it to life?
Well, I have to say, there were some people who were scratching their head. They're like, wait, anthropologists, what? Who are they? I don't get it. I was very fortunate because at the time when I started, there was this spirit of entrepreneurialism. In fact, you almost couldn't survive if you weren't somewhat entrepreneurial. So I really glommed onto that notion. Now, again, it wasn't easy because people were kind of, like I said, scratching their head. Why would you bring anthropologists in? What's the research? But the idea that I can demystify these technologies for our clients, for our fellow colleagues, I think was motivating for them, right? And it was a time when they said, go try it, right? There's very much a culture in the tech world of, see what happens, right? Test and learn. Don't go put all your eggs in that basket, but try something and see what happens. And so that was helpful, that culture of entrepreneurialism and just trying. I think the other thing that was very helpful was I learned along the way that you have to bring people along with you. When I first started speaking about all of this and about anthropology, there was someone in the marketing side who said, I don't know if I get that, but I kind of like it. Let's go play.
Right.
And so having her really help guide me to become a partner with her and socialize. So something else I learned in this space is that you cannot do it alone. You have to have partnership, strategic partnership, and you have to learn how to socialize and bring people along with you. You cannot do it alone. So since I learned that early on, we were able to penetrate the system with our ideas. And then finally, once we saw that clients were raising their eyebrows, like they had not heard of, no one had been talking about humans and technology, anthropology and digital. that was exciting. And so they actually trotted me out and put me on stages to talk about it.
Wow.
And that actually opened up a whole industry for me.
Wow.
That's how I became a public speaker. Yeah. So, there were some challenges, but the culture enabled it to work as long as I kind of knew how to navigate it.
Yeah. So, and again, the culture was very entrepreneurial, right? Because so everybody, I think you told me this, right? So every single employee is kind of like an entrepreneur inside the company.
You kind of have to go there. I mean, things have evolved since then. It's a much bigger company since I started, but there is an expectation that you're not just going to rinse and repeat. That you're going to bring something new and you're going to evolve it. I also had a gun to my head, in a way, my own gun to my head, because I'm like, how am I going to survive in this company? I mean, they hired me. They didn't really know what to do with me, right? So I'm like, I better figure out my way in, right? Yeah. And so when I did a listening tours when I first started at Google, and when I heard a client say to me, hey, you guys give us a lot of data, but you don't go any deeper. I said, that's my opportunity. I'm the one who's going to go deeper. I'm going to uncover this. Yeah. And so little by little, and then people start seeing the attraction that clients and the industry is having towards this kind of thinking. So we started with the meaning of mobile. This was when mobile phones were first starting, and people are like, oh, what are these things? And how do you make communication? Do you just take an ad and make it smaller? Right? And we're like, no. This is a whole different universe. So we started with mobile, then we went to with social media, the meaning of social, meaning of video, VR, search. And people started getting more and more excited about it.
Yeah, well, no, that's incredible, because when you think about it, I mean, you were like a lot of times in our minds out there that aren't, there where you were, it seems like it's an effortless thing at scale, but it seems like you had a focus, right, on where to start and then build it and scale it, right? So how do you scale innovation in a company like that?
Absolutely. Yes, that's hard. And, in addition to that, the other way we source insight is actually just looking at our data and calling through all of our data to develop human stories, which then enable us to help our clients create content. No matter what, both of those worlds, even though I was getting backing, even though I was getting support, the entire universe didn't necessarily always support it, right? And so what I learned from that was to scale it, we had to make sure that it was monetizable. And I had to be able to talk about it in the lingua franca of my stakeholders, right? Ironically, my clients, they were agencies, they were marketers, they picked up on the benefits faster than my internal stakeholders who think a very different way. Yeah. So in order to really ensure that it was going to be embraced, again, I had to socialize it in the beginning, in the middle, in the end, bring people along with me in that way. But I also had to package / kind of like convert the benefit in a way that those folks could understand it, right? Yeah. Metrics, money, client growth.
So in that world, right? So let's say you got all that right. Everybody's behind you. Yeah. You launched this initiative and it's big, right? And you're at it, you're doing it, you're leading it, and then all of a sudden an unforeseen challenge comes. Like, how did you pivot, right? I mean, how did you make sure that you could overcome that challenge and still keep the drive going?
Yeah. Well, we were definitely harnessing a lot of insights from this research, but we also realized that we were kind of ignoring some of our major assets, which is the actual data that we have, right? So we were doing all this anthropological research, but we also wanted to show how you can take all this Google data, which is extremely rich, and turn it into human insight. So I had to have the team pivot slightly to not just leverage the insights from the anthropological research, but also take that anthropological brain and apply it to the data that we had in front of us, especially since that data keeps changing and changing and changing. So I had to get the group to pivot. And then the other thing that was a huge challenge for us was, we are still a creative group, very humanistic group inside a very measurable, very linear thinking organization, right? And so there was always a challenge as to whether we were actually going to survive.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, there were moments when we were this close to the chopping block. So that was even more of a challenge for us. And luckily, we had some leaders who came in and said, okay, and this was a huge lesson for me. You must tie your output very clearly to something that is monetizable. You have to be close to the money and figure out how to be close to the money. And so instead of us offering this great inspiration to our clients who, spend on our platforms, we really had to tie it to the top spenders and make it part of the deal negotiation. That they will, if they spend so much, they get access to us. Yeah. And that created a much tighter synergy to the business. And so that really taught me how to be a business person, not just a creative thinker or researcher.
That's it's incredible and very, very inspiring. And you hit on a couple things that I wanted to come back to because and go a little bit deeper and tie it now to this world of AI, right? So at our company Chai, we call it human-centered AI.
Yes,
right?
I
Where
love
we're
that.
combining the expertise of behavioral science, human-centered design, our deep engineering background, and really just understanding how to put humans at the middle or center or heart of AI.
Great.
And building it in that way, right? And when you talk about anthropology and what kind of data you got, and this led you to these whys of why people did this or that or whatever. I mean, this has to be a rich treasure trove that Google or some company would be like, oh my God, this is anthropology, or this kind of view of how to discover what humans are really doing and the why is the very thing that we need for AI to understand us so that it could be more human or can aid humans better, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, tell me, I mean, do you think anthropology and what you were doing is really key to AI? And
well, I absolutely, but and on so many levels. I mean, first, let's just go back to basics. What are we doing, right? Why are we on this earth?
Yeah.
We are doing things to make our lives better. We are creating products, services, ideas, concepts to offer to people. So if we don't understand the people that we are creating for, what is the point, right? So at the end of the day, it is about human beings. It's about inspiring them, getting them to want to connect and engage with what we are trying to sell. In terms of the anthropological role in particular with AI, I mean, it's interesting. I partner with another anthropologist, Tom Maschio. We've been recently publishing a lot together. He and I have been working together for 4 years, and we talk about the fact that what AI today gives us doesn't give you an interpretive view of things. So if I went into AI right now and said, tell me how to make the best beauty brand, yeah, they'll call and collect, but they don't necessarily go to the next level of interpreting from sources that are way more human. They just take from the obvious places and spaces. Sure. So it requires the human being to either be that anthropologist and understand what are the white spaces based off of human beings' needs and aspirations and nuances, or we're going to have to train the AI to be much more nuanced, right? So either way, there's still a role that anthropologists are going to have to play to ensure that what we create is not just iterative, but actually really kind of catapults ourselves beyond what's the obvious answer.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because, right now you see this, the lens of AI for a lot of people is just proliferated with tools, right? So I have this ChatGPT or I have this other tool or whatever, and it does this or that, instead of being that very core thing to who you are as a human, or where it could really go. I wanted to see like what your thoughts were on how we can ensure, that AI tools, right, are designed to enhance the human capabilities and maybe, in a way that doesn't replace them, right?
I am not going to say that there aren't challenges we're going to have to overcome. Let me just put that out in the open, right? And I think we're all wrestling with those challenges. But for the most part, I'm very excited about the advent of AI. I really do believe it's going to be, if used properly, is going to enhance our humanity. And so first reason, which is the obvious one, is it's going to take a lot of stuff off our plate. Okay, so if it takes a lot of stuff off our plate, we can spend more time doing human stuff, right? Meaning I can go home and spend time with my family, or I can, do the things I love to do. The next step is that it actually enhances our human creativity. You mentioned this before as one of the 4 elements of what's fundamental to being human, right? The fact that it enhances our creativity. It allows, as I mentioned before, it allows for that confluence of notions and concepts like never before. So here I have, maybe before I didn't think I was so creative. I didn't go to design school, or I didn't go and, learn how to write books or whatever. So therefore I'm not creative. Absolutely not. We are all inherently creative at a neuroscience level. It's basically when you are creating these synapses in your brain, right? Connecting these unlike neurons.
Right.
Everybody can be creative. They just didn't believe they have that in them. Okay, so now if you have a tool to facilitate that, imagine all the ideas that are going to surface from all over the world to really enhance our lives, to solve those crazy challenges, whether it's, global warming or stop criminals, all the way to creating amazing works of art or dramas or, just life experiences. So again, yes, it takes stuff away so we can spend more time doing what we want to do that's very human, but it also enables us to spend more of that time now being creative. And when we are creative, when we come up with ideas, it fulfills us. It inspires us. It inspires others to be more creative.
All right. So I love that. That's awesome. And, I guess it really shows is how excited it seems you are about the way AI can really enhance creativity. I mean, what is the most exciting thing?
I'll just give you an example.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been publishing a few articles for, as I said, with my partner, and we have all the concepts. We have all the ideas. They're all from here, our heads. But then I can leverage AI to help translate that into a really meaningful, powerful article overnight.
Yeah.
Right? Now, of course, I still have to go in and I have to massage it, and I want the tone to reflect my attitude, and I want, to push on this lever or that lever. But the fact is, I now have these beautiful pieces of art, if you will, that translates something that is so meaningful to me to the rest of the world for them to understand. It allows me to express myself and our ideas that I think are really game-changing and important.
And so, like, when you think about all that, right, and that excitement and that curious wonder, like even that you have there, that you've placed on that very human lens, it reminds me of what you were talking about, really, when it comes to your background, and you have this anthropological and humanistic lens, right? That it has really, obviously, been well articulated on this episode. But I think, the interesting thing is that you apply it to business, right?
Yes.
And if you take that lens, right, and you break it down, how should an entrepreneur think about AI versus how should private equity CEO think about AI versus how should a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company think about AI?
Across all of them, I think there's some fundamentals that are the same, right? And I mentioned them before. I touched on them before. One is that, like, obviously AI is going to greatly reduce the administrative work, the scut work that takes time away from the imaginative work, from the consultative work, from the human work. So no matter whatever you can do to ensure that people can take off their plates, the administrative work, do it. That means different things for different companies, obviously. And then the other kind of overarching truth of AI is that it will enable everybody to be creative. Now, when I say creative, again, I don't necessarily mean coming up with a sonnet. I mean coming up with a solution to a challenge, and or coming up with a new challenge. I remember having a conversation with someone about AI where before, what gave you currency was having the solution. That doesn't give you currency anymore because AI gives you the solution. What gives you currency is having the best question, is citing the most interesting problem that should be solved, right? So no matter where you are, what kind of business person you are, that's what you're going to want to cultivate in your teams. That curiosity, that ability to come up with the problem to be solved and interesting ways of solving it, right? So no matter what. Now, if you break it down to these different levels, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, clearly an entrepreneur is trying to spin many, 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 many different plates. So my advice to an entrepreneur is to leverage AI to take 90% of those plates off the table. Give it to someone else to do so that the entrepreneur can spend most of his or her time doing what they're there to do, which is conceive an idea and sell it. And then even in the selling process, right? AI can help you ensure that you have the best message and that your pitch deck is as focused and clean and, persuasive as possible. When it comes to the next level, which is a PE director, right? Here you have a number of companies. And so scale is going to be important, right? There was one story that we were talking about yesterday, how you have to do a ton of investigating and very thorough investigating of companies to ensure that you have a good bet in front of you, right? It requires a lot of time, a lot of research. If you have AI to help you scale that investigative process, right? So now you can investigate many, many companies and look for the red herrings, look for the bright spots very quickly, then you have that much more understanding of the universe that you can invest in. In addition to that, if you're also, managing across a number of, portfolio of companies, they're all going to have their unique challenges, but they're all still going to have to come up with ideas to push their companies, right? We are no longer in a universe where incremental change, especially in the PE space, incremental change is enough to guarantee business growth.
Wow.
The way to guarantee business growth are big, hairy problems that get solved with amazing ideas. And so you're going to need the teams within these companies are going to need all of that brain space, that creative problem-solving brain space and the tools that enable them to leverage them to go full on at that, right? And again, I think the business leader too has that same challenge, especially if he or she is running a huge business. It's much easier to try to search for incremental change because you have a good thing going, and to move the Titanic is really hard, but you can't rely on that anymore. Again, for business growth, one needs some big hunkin' idea, AI being one of them. Look how that totally transformed all these companies. You can't afford to do things like business as usual. So how do you quickly take your company and find those big opportunities, find those problems to be solved, get folks oriented around them to solve for them, and come up with ideas quickly? You need that balance of the administrative task slash kind of scalable benefit of AI meets the creative partnership that AI can give your teams to come up with those ideas.
Yeah, no. And so, that's amazing. And I want to double click on it.
Yeah.
Actually. And so where do you see organizations still getting it wrong when it comes to integrating AI into their strategies based upon what you were just saying?
I think they don't think of AI as a partner. They think of AI as a tool that you have to overcome.
Gotcha.
There is a set of behaviors that are necessary. There's a mindset that is necessary in order to really harness AI at its best, right? You talk about curiosity.
Yeah.
That is key in order to get the most out of AI. We talk about, you talk about prompting potential. Garbage in, garbage out. You have to know now when you leverage AI, what questions to ask, how to consider those questions. What are the elements of the prompts that are going to be critical, right? And in fact, one friend of mine says, by using AI, he's become much more logical in his thinking because he's forced to ask one set of questions, then dig into ask the next set of questions, right? So to me, and I saw this with the technological revolution too, we tend to think about the thing and we don't think about the how, right? And the how it's all about the mentality.
So when you think about integrating AI even deeper, right? So into teams, right?
Yes.
That are building that. It's interesting because I've been thinking about, very deeply that we don't have the right people on most of the teams that are looking at AI in companies. And what I mean by that is, these anthropologists, these behavioral scientists, these user experience researchers, or, UX designers or design thinkers, right? They're the ones that are poised and equipped the most to understand what humans need most from AI, and the why we need it, right?
Right.
And yet they're not on a lot of the teams, and they're kind of an afterthought at times. Instead, it should be a forethought, and they should be the ones put at the center. I mean, so if you were to build a team today around that for, AI, an AI initiative, I mean, how would you build it, and would you have those on the team?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe in diversity of thought. Right. Again, going back to the core of creative thinking is the confluence of different notions and concepts. So absolutely, do I want to have people who are steeped in human beings, how they behave, how they think, what they need? Yes. And to your point, I think often they're put at the end to test. Are people pressing the green button more or the red button more? No, that's so late in the process. But I wouldn't want exclusively those kinds of guys or gals, because you also want the engineer.
Yep.
You also want the designer. You also want the urban planner, right? You want all these different people who have perspectives on the same thing. I always say, like, if someone asked a group of people how to create a table, a dining room table, you're going to have very different perspectives depending on where you come from. If you're an engineer, you're going to think about the ergonomics of the table and like how much room does the need between the table and the chair, right? Or if you're going to ask an interior designer, they're going to think about the design of the table vis-a-vis the look of the room and what is the aesthetic and what's the genre, blah, blah. You ask an anthropologist how they would build a table. They would talk about, the culture of the living room or dining room, right? How people eat, what are people's daily lives like? And therefore, how would we position that table? So my point is, every perspective is critical to create that most meaningful experience. You need all of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, I guess when, you are leading that team and building that team, at the end of the day, it really comes down to who you are as a leader of that. And it comes down to, what you believe, right? Most, right?
Yes.
And a lot of the things that you've mentioned today about your journey really shows how you think, how you believe, and the curiosity that drives you. And I guess if we were to just come back to you for a moment, right? What's one lesson probably in your journey that you wish more leaders understood?
Again, it goes back to like, it's all about the human beings, baby, right? Yeah. It's all about people and moving them. We had a conversation last night about how do we help our clients overcome kind of the, how do they build their business and not just think about the numbers, right? And what I've noticed along the way throughout my life is that if you make people understand that they're creating and selling for people and what people need, they connect to that. Yeah. So I just think, look, I think it's all about the people. It's the people you lead. It's the people you are selling to. It's the people who are eventually going to be embracing and living with the ideas and the products and services that you provide. It's all about that. And that sense of curiosity, I think that always have that, and a tenacity, this feeling of I want to get shit done, right? I think it's the combination of real curiosity about the world, love for people, real interest in people, and then, okay, let's translate that and make that into something that's meaningful quickly.
It's such a exciting world that you live in, it seems, and you have all these followers, you have, all this, these stages that you speak on, and these events that you do, and you're making such a big impact, right? When you look at that, if you were to take a step back, and you think about the future, and all the things that you're doing, the work that you're doing, the places you're speaking, the incredible things that you're writing, what kind of future do you hope that your work is helping shape?
Ultimately, I really want people to believe in the possibility of themselves and others, right? Yeah. I can do this. I can make this. We can make this, right? If you believe in that, I do trust that things are going to take shape. You talk about potential. I talk about possibility. That's if I can do anything. And that's what I try to do amongst myself, right? But also I think one of the reasons I loved leading teams is that I don't tell them what to do. My teams are way smarter than me. But what I try to do is cultivate this sense of curiosity and this possibility. Yes, you can make it happen. One person said to me once, and I've held that dear, that I'm like their tailwind. That's the goal. How do I be people's tailwind? That they have a kernel of an idea, they can make it happen. And they can believe in others, right? I think so many people are down on humanity. And for the most part, we're pretty damn smart and creative and good. Let's harness that.
Yeah, I feel it. I'm ready to harness it. I love that. So lightning round.
Yes.
This, we're
hit me.
We're kind of coming to the end of our show here. So I'm going to throw out some questions at you and see what you think. All right.
Okay.
So one risk that you are glad that you took.
Studying anthropology.
Okay. All right. A book, quote, idea that really changed the way that you lead.
So I'll never forget this. As I mentioned before, I was studying economic anthropology, and this was in the 90s, and everyone thought I was nuts and crazy. And I really believed in the importance of combining anthropology in the business space. And I remember reading this book called Riding the Waves of Culture. And it was all about doing business in different cultures and understanding those different cultures. And there's a line in the first chapter. I always believe, like, the first chapter, if you don't read anything but the first chapter, you're okay with any book. And there's this line by these professors, and these are Harvard Business School professors. And they said, business school students learn the best answers to the wrong questions. And that stuck with me. And I'm like, wow. Okay, so it's my job to ask the right questions. And it's not to say that they're not brilliant and smart, and there's some good questions that they're learning answers to, or good answers that they're getting. But for the most part, challenge ourselves. Are we asking the right questions? And that has really compelled me over and over again. People say to me, Abby, you never stop. I don't know if this is my Jewish upbringing, like my Talmudic background, but you got to ask more than one question. You got to push at it, because eventually you'll surface the real challenge.
Wow, I love that. Well, that leads me to my very last question, which is, and it's not even really a question. Maybe it's just a statement that you can finish, right?
Okay.
So finish this statement, right?
Yes.
Prompting potential means?
Really surfacing people's sense of possibility, charging that sense of possibility amongst themselves, and believing it amongst others so that they can all do it together.
I love that. Wow. I am so inspired and
thank you so much for
really
having
blown
me.
away. Yeah, so it's been such an incredible time, and I want to thank you so much for coming in, flying all the way from New York to be here with me in the studio. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. And how can people find you?
They can find me on various ways. AbigailPosner.com is my website. But if you choose to just go onto the regular social media sites, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah. I love that, right? That you have yours. I have one, rogerrohatke.com as well. But yeah, LinkedIn's a way that a lot of us connect. But I love that you're also on Instagram, big time Instagram, posting and different things. So that's where they can see some of the stuff
and
with
you can
Maye.
check out, you can check out the stuff with Maye there. I happen to be a member of a company, or not a company, rather, it's a foundation. It's a fashion, sustainable foundation. And that's how I ended up speaking with Maye Musk. But you can also hang out on my podcast called Human Code with Abigail Posner if you want to engage more on these kinds of topics.
Awesome. I love it. And thank you again for being on the show. And to all of you that are watching, I hope you're very inspired, as I am, by Abigail and her story and all that she's doing in the world. And if you want to learn more, feel free to go to heychai.ai or reach out on LinkedIn or other means. And again, remember, you have the opportunity to prompt your potential.